NRTIs. There are some specific ways that you can manage the adverse effects that are produced by AZT. Okay. If, for instance, AZT produces seizures, you don't want to use your phenobarb or primidone, that is phenobarbital, or you don't want to use primidone, which is also a barbiturate, if you will. You don't want to use dilatin either. Those three seem to interact with the effectiveness of your NRTIs, NNRTIs, and PIs. So they seem to affect the effectiveness of your nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors, your non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors, and your protease inhibitors. So essentially then, you want to go with things like gabapentin for the management of such seizures. Lyrica seems to also work with these agents. Galepart is also effective in the management of such seizures. And you might also use just a benzodiazepine that can affect muscular movement centrally. Keppra is another agent that you may want to try in managing AZT-induced or NNRTI-induced or PI-induced seizures. For the GI adverse effects, when the GI adverse effect becomes very troublesome, there's a specific agent called Fulizac, F-L-U-Y and F-U-L-Y-Z-A-Q, Fulizac. It is specifically designed for managing AZT-induced GI adverse effects when that becomes troublesome. And we've mentioned the fact that you can use thiamine, that is vitamin B1, for managing that CNS-related adverse effect. The one that we said you could get from alcoholics, because they don't take vitamin B1 when they are alcoholics. They don't eat, they just drink. Okay. And if AZT happens to cause hyperglycemia, which it sometimes produces, then you can use your regular oral hypoglycemic agent, or maybe a shot of insulin to bring that down. If it produces the hematologic adverse effect, that is your neutropenia. You can just that granulocytopenia or neutropenia. You can use erythropoietin. You can use Epogen. You use Epogen if it's anemia related, so you can get red blood cells, hemoglobin, to bring the oxygen back up so the anemia is relieved. Or you can use your CSF, colony stimulating factor, particularly that GM-CSF. That we mentioned under ganciclovir. Okay. So that will help to manage, your depression of white blood cells, and then the Epogen will help to manage the anemia. So these are all some agents. Lipodystrophy. You can see lipodystrophy with these anti-HIV drugs in general. With AZT, what it causes is lipoatrophy. In other words, the fat in the face would actually be removed. Would be going more towards the trunk. And so we call that lipoatrophy. And we talked about that difference a while back when we were dealing with your anti-diabetic drugs, particularly your insulin. So for that possible lipoatrophy, there's a drug called Sculptra that one can use. There's one called Radies that can also help with that lipoatrophy, which is a type of lipodystrophy. Okay. Yeah, one can see. So those are some of the specific agents.
Dr. Mo, you said that for the granulocytosis, it's going to be the GM.
No. Granulocytopenia is the opposite.
Yeah.
Okay.
We use the GM-CSF, and then for the anemia, we use
Right. Because Epogen is a brand name for erythropoietin. That's what you use your red blood cells. And then we'll just wrap up your NRTIs by mentioning some outstanding adverse effects that you may see with some other agents. For instance, abacavir, ABC, abacavir, the outstanding adverse effect of ABC is actually hypersensitivity. Hypersensitivity resulting from the administration of ABC can actually lead to death. And so it's something that is very often looked at. And
Please, what is ABC?
abacavir. That's why it's called ABC.
Thank you.
It's one of your NRTIs. And hypersensitivity is its main adverse effect. This one would say that hypersensitivity is the therapy limiting toxicity of your abacavir or ABC, therapy limiting toxicity, because it can result in death. So much so that one has to screen the patient for what is called HLA-B 1507. Okay. That means human leukocyte antigen. Human leukocyte antigen. If somebody has a positive level of HLA-B 1507, there's great likelihood that they would be hypersensitive to abacavir. So you might want to use a different drug in treating that patient. And abacavir also tends to greatly increase the risk for myocardial infarction. That's another serious adverse effect of that drug. Other than that, it just produces what you would expect to see with all your NRTIs. You know, the hepatomegaly with steatosis, lactic acidosis, and GI-related adverse effects, and so on. So that's one that stands out. And the other one that stands out would be your DDI, that is dideoxyinosine, and dideoxycytosine. Okay. Dideoxyinosine and dideoxycytosine. Both of those, and even your D4T, and see that as targeting. But these agents are seldom used today because you have all the combinations that you can use for HIV management. But these three drugs, DDI, DDC, and D4T, can produce a lot of peripheral neuropathy. And that's a major adverse effect of these agents. And then they can cause pancreatitis, particularly this DDI, in terms of that severe pancreatitis. And apart from those, they can produce all those usual adverse effects of your NRTIs. Okay. So basically, the NRTIs covered. Then we can go to the NNRTIs. So we're leaving the nucleosides. Okay? In the synthetic events, we talked about nucleosides and non-nucleosides. The nucleosides were the ones that had purine derivatives, where we dealt with acyclovir, and then the pyrimidine derivatives, where we dealt with AZT. Okay. So now we're leaving the nucleosides and going to the non-nucleosides. So these will be agents that will not need activation. Remember, your nucleosides have to be phosphorylated to the triphosphate. That's called activation before they can work. Non-nucleosides don't need activation. And the non-nucleosides that would inhibit reverse transcriptase would include drugs like Delaverdine and your Aterbardine. And you have Nevirapine. That's another project there. Efavirenz. Another one. And so, Ribavirin. Etravirin. Now, Amivirin. So, another one. And Dora. And the one that will take as a representative agent will be your efavirenz. We'll say a word or two about this Ribavirin, which we say is very commonly used, especially in combination with other agents. And we'll say something about Etravirin, which is also very much used. So if we look at what is common to the NNRTIs, number one will be their mechanism of action. They basically all competitively inhibit your reverse transcriptase. Okay. Then they all seem to have a very high plasma protein binding rate, usually in the 90s, upper 90s. The only exception there is Nevirapine, which is just about 55% plasma protein bound. So they all have very high plasma protein binding, with the possible exception of your Nevirapine. And they all tend to have a very long half-life. The half-lives are usually in the 30 to 60 hours range. So very long half-lives, with the exception of Delaverdine. Delaverdine is only about it's only about 58. Not 50%, 5.8% in terms, 5.8 hours in terms of its half-life. So compared to the others that are between 30 and 60, Delaverdine seems to be a very, very short-acting agent. And that underscores another major point in basic pharmacology. When you talk about half-life, it is actually relative. So it depends on the group that you're talking about, that you're comparing it to. If you're looking, for instance, at your carbapenems, the longest acting one is ertapenem, and it's only 4 hours. And you claim that that is long. So for carbapenems, yes, that is long, but for NNRTIs, that is nothing. Okay, so when you say half-life is relative to the group that you are considering, it's not like an absolute thing. Okay. So they have very long half-lives, and their primary route of excretion is fecal. So for these agents, for most of them, you don't have to even worry at all about the condition of the kidneys, because the excretion rate is excretion route is mainly fecal, especially for the parent compound. The metabolite, some of them can go out through the urine, but for the parent compound, the primary route of excretion is fecal. And then they do exhibit a phenomenon that is called autoinduction, which basically means they can stimulate the enzyme that metabolizes them. Okay, so if the drug is metabolized by 3A4, that is, the drug is a substrate for 3A4, that drug can also stimulate or activate 3A4, which means it is inducing its own metabolism. Okay. So you see that a lot with your NMRTIs. And we'll get more specific as we go along, because there are some that will auto-induce, and by the same token, they would inhibit that same enzyme that metabolizes them. Okay. But this auto-induction is a known aspect of your NNRTI pharmacology. And lastly, they all produce a lot of CNS-related adverse effects and a lot of severe skin reactions. And sometimes the CNS adverse effects and the skin-related adverse effects are the therapy-limiting toxicity of these NNRTIs. So the CNS adverse effect can be so severe that you have to stop administering the drug. And the skin reaction can be so severe that you have to stop administering the drug. Okay, so those are some common factors or common characteristics of your NNRTIs. And like I said, we will take Sostivir, that is your efavirenz, as the representative. That's the brand name for efavirenz, is number 4. That's his brand name, Sostivir. Okay, so as usual, we start off with its mechanism of action. Like we said, we do the same for all of them. Competitive inhibition of your reverse transcriptase. Okay. So competitive inhibition of reverse transcriptase, that's the mechanism of action. Okay. What's the discussion about?
I'm lost about this one,
Efavirenz?
Yeah, the first one we did, that is the representative, is it the
We haven't talked about the representative
So which
yet.
one did you do? Is it common characteristics?
What was the title that I wrote up here?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We started off by looking at what's common to the group. And now we're picking a representative of the group to discuss the pharmacology. And we're using efavirenz, which comes under the brand name Sostivir. So the mechanism of action is that. And in terms of its ADME, we know that Sostivir is administered orally, and you often give 3 by 200 milligrams PO, QHS. That is its usual dosage. You give it QHS because of the CNS adverse effects, because it can depress the CNS. Yeah, and so you just want the patient to sleep it through. So that's the usual dosage and the route of administration. Fatty fatty food can increase the ANC of your epivirus. Okay. So, if you're following the effects of fatty food, if you start off with your Zovirax, that is Isacovir, the purine agent or the purine representative, you know that fatty food will have no effect. Okay? And then if you go to AZT, fatty food can decrease the ANC. Then go to NNRTI, Sustivir, fatty food will increase the ANC. And when we get to the PIs, we'll say that fatty food will decrease the ANC. Okay. So that's the effect of fatty food here. And if we look at its half-life, the half-life is like 40 to 55 hours. And so that stays in common with what we said, that they all have very long half-lives. If you look at the half-life for this Etravirine, okay, that is about 41 hours. If you look at the half-life for your Ribavirin, is about 50 hours. Okay. And the range for Sustivir is 40 to 55. In terms of its plasma protein binding, it is greater than 99.5% plasma protein bound. And the plasma protein there is albumin. That's what it binds to. That is a little different, for instance, for your Etravirine. Etravirine is about 99.6% plasma protein bound, but it binds to alpha acid glycoprotein instead of albumin. Okay. So it is about 99.6% plasma protein bound, but the plasma protein that it binds to is alpha acid glycoprotein. If you look at Ribavirin, that is about 99.7% plasma protein bound, and it binds to albumin. Okay. And if we look at the metabolism of the drug, before we get to the metabolism, let me say something about this. Usually when a drug is highly plasma protein bound, you don't see CNS adverse effects. Okay? But with this NNRTI, it's the reverse, or it's an exception to the rule, basically. They are all very highly plasma protein bound, and yet they produce a lot of CNS related adverse effects. That could mean only one thing. It could mean that they are actively transported across your blood-brain barrier. Okay, so, because it's either that the drug is highly lipid soluble, you know, to get to the CSF, or it is actively transported to get to the CSF. Okay. So them being bound, it's most likely that they are actively transported into the CSF, and that's why they produce a lot of CNS related adverse effects. The metabolism for Sustivir, the drug is biotransformed by your 3A4 and 2B6. Those are the enzymes that will biotransform your Sustivir. If we look at the Etravirine is actually biotransformed by 3A4, 2C9, 2C19, and sometimes by the 2D6. The first three are the primary enzymes that biotransform Intellis. The brand name for etravirine is Intellis, as intelligent. Okay, that's his brand name, Intellis, for etravirine. And so it is biotransformed by those enzymes. And with your Sustiva, you can get a stimulation or induction, if you will, of 3A4. So basically it has that auto-induction property. It induces the enzyme that biotransforms it. Okay, so that's auto-induction that we describe. Mostly, but to a small extent, it also has an inhibitory effect on your 3A4. We looked at etravirine. Etravirine does not inhibit those enzymes, it actually stimulates it. So etravirine basically induces the enzymes that metabolizes it. So for etravirine, it's auto-induction all the way. And you look at ribavirin. Ribavirin is mostly biotransformed by 3A4. So ribavirin is a substrate for 3A4. And so it is mostly metabolized by 3A4. It has neither induction or inductory activity or nor inhibitory activities on the enzymes. Okay, so ribavirin does not give you autoinduction. It does not induce 3A4, and it does not inhibit 3A4. Those are some classical differences among those top three NNRTIs. Another thing that stands out about ribavirin is that the drug must not be administered with anything that would increase the pH of the stomach. So you never give ribavirin. It comes in 25 milligram strength already. As cabenuva can actually also be injected intramuscularly. Okay. And we'll talk about the specific system of administering cabenuva. Cabenuva Cabenuva contains your ribavirin and cabotegravir, which we will discuss a little later. Okay. So the ribavirin in cabenuva can be administered orally as a tablet, and it can also be injected intramuscularly. Okay. So if you give it PO, it must not be given with anything like, say, your PPIs or your H2 antagonists, anything that would elevate the pH of the stomach can lead to a drastic reduction in the absorption of that drug, such that it can affect its effectiveness. All right, so that's the metabolism and metabolism. Excretion, like we said, will be mainly fecal for the parent compound. The metabolic product can be excreted through the renal system, but the parent compound will be excreted through the feces. So indications for Sostegel would be HIV/AIDS, and when we are through with the PIs, we will look at some combinations that you will use for your post-exposure prophylaxis. When through the protease inhibitors, and you'll see the involvement of particularly efavirenz and ribavirin in the post-exposure prophylaxis of HIV. So we can say it will be used in the treatment, and we can say it will be used in the prophylaxis of HIV/AIDS. And the adverse effects of your Sostegel, okay, number one there is your CNS. Produces almost any kind of CNS-related adverse effects you can think of. The most important one is severe depression. Depression that can lead to suicidal ideation and attempt. In other words, the patient can have this idea of killing themselves and can also attempt to kill themselves. So suicidal ideation and attempt. And like we said, that can be a reason why you stop using the drug. So it's a therapy limiting toxicity of your Sostegel. And some of the CNS adverse effects seem to be opposite to each other. For instance, it causes depression, and yet, in some people, it causes euphoria. You know, which seems like they're happy and jumpy and all that. You know, it causes insomnia. And yet, it can also produce somnolence. Which would be opposite to each other, but it produces all of those. Your regular headaches, some hallucination, and the same with this drug, some agitation, also the same with this drug, confusion. So it produces just about any CNS related adverse event that you can think of. And then two, on the skin, it can produce regular rash, of course, just the rash, hives or urticaria. Can produce all of that. It can produce even Johnson's syndrome. Okay, so, and like I said, CNS and skin, top two adverse effects of your sustenance. Pancreatitis. So you can have an inflammation of the pancreas that is also present with this drug. Then CVS, it can cause some tachycardia and flushing. So you can get flushing, you can get tachycardia or increasing your heart rate, and increases the risk of myocardial infarction. So the drug can produce all of those. Then your GI, it can cause the non-specific GI adverse effects that we normally know of. Okay. So, but again, once you know this first two, just you're home safe with that drug. A little bit of hepatotoxicity has been recorded, but not that big, if you will. Number 5, so 6, we can just say some hepatitis or hepatotoxicity. And you just simply see an increase in the transaminases, ALT, AST, the concentration can go up. So, not a big deal. And in terms of the drug-to-drug interaction that you see with your sustenance, the drug-to-drug interaction usually involves drugs that will stimulate 3A4, which will mean you'll get a decrease in the effectiveness of the drug, and then drugs that will inhibit 3A4, which means you will get elevated effects from your sustenance. And that's all we wanted to say about sustenance. And if you pull your handout or the little sheet that we sent out, I think about 2 days ago, you can master some of the combination drugs that involve your NNRTIs and some of your NRTIs. For instance, if I ask about that combination, it will contain what? Okay, dorovirin and lamten, okay? Lam, of course, means lamivudine, and ten is tenofovir. Okay. What about Synfi? Synfi and Synfi-Low? Okay. Some of them. Yeah. And of course, with ribavirin, you'll see that Nuka, for instance, it is present there. You can also see it in your Complera. Okay, so it's present in there. And some other combination drugs. Dovato can also contain ribavirin. Okay. Okay. Let me say something about that Sustela. Sustela is considered a category D drug, which means don't use it during pregnancy. However, it can be used in a pregnant patient when it is combined with, say, lamivudine. Okay, it can be used when it's combined with another agent like lamivudine. The only stipulation is that you must not administer it to a pregnant patient until after the pregnancy is 8 weeks old. Okay, so it's a category D by itself, but it can be used in a pregnant patient when it is combined with, say, lamivudine or with tenofovir, as long as the pregnancy is over 8 weeks. And that nevirapine, the nevirapine was actually the first drug that offered protection to a fetus that is growing in the woman. That was the first drug that was used or approved for usage in a pregnant patient because it actually provided protection against HIV infection in the growing fetus. Okay, the PIs are next. The protease inhibitors. So, for the protease inhibitors, we say what's all the fuss about? And we say, and that's now it's tall. Your PIs always end in there. You know, Prenavir, for some Prenavir, and so on. So they always end in there. And first there will be Force and Prenavir. And then, of course, we have Prenavir itself. Prenavir actually goes to Prenavir in the body, and that's why the company just stopped making Prenavir. Okay, it was the same company that made Prenavir and Prenavir. So, when you give Prenavir, the yield of Prenavir in the body is actually greater than just giving Prenavir straight. And so they said, well, why make it? So they just made Prenavir, which will go to, Prenavir, which will go to Prenavir in the body. And then you have Saquinavir, and maybe I'll Ritonavir, that's the R here. So Sapunavir, Indinavir, Ritonavir, and your Ritonavir.
Are 4 and 7 the same drug?
Hmm?
Number 4 and 7 are they the same drug?
Oh, okay, we've done that. I was writing before then. So 7 Zinavir. That's the M there. Then we have the Pranavir. That will be a T. For the Pranavir. In there. Then we have Lopinavir. And then you have your Atazanavir. So Atazanavir and Lopinavir. Okay. Looks like let's say, so the one that we would take as a representative agent would be your Fosaprinavir. I think it was in the D. That's your Darunavir. Okay. So you have all your PIs. Okay. Even though we'll be saying for Samprinavir, the pharmacology would actually be your Aprinavir because that's the active moiety that produces the effect. Okay. And like we did under your NNRTIs, we'll look at some factors that are common to your PIs. And as usual, they all have the same mechanism of action. And they can all be administered orally. And they have to be given with food. The only one that was an exception to the rule has now been removed from the market, and that's Indinavir or Crixivir. That was its brand name, and that's that number 6 there. Has now been removed from the market because it produced a lot of adverse effects. A patient who is on a PI can develop what is called Crixibelly. So the midsection will be enlarged, you know, the belly and all that area. And the drug, the PI that produced most of that midsection enlargement was Indinavir because its brand name was Crixivir. So they just refer to the condition as Crixibelly. Okay. And that drug also produced a lot of hyperbilirubinemia. And so that can lead to, of course, jaundice, and can lead to icterus. So that's the beginning point of the yellowing of the eyes and the skin. Okay. So all of them would be administered with food, so we cannot say except anymore, because indenavir is no longer there. They all have a high plasma protein binding. The former only exception was indenavir, so we can't say exception anymore. For the most part, they can give you hyperglycemia, they can elevate your triglycerides, they can elevate your total cholesterol, and they can give you hemorrhage, especially if the patient already has a problem with hemorrhage. And what population would that be? Population that
Who's on oral?
a what?
On oral.
Who is usually deficient in factor 8, coagulation factor 8? Hemophiliacs. Okay? So you have to exercise caution in giving a PI to a hemophiliac because of the tendency of your hemophilia, of your PIs to produce hemorrhage. If it's still necessary, you can give them as long as you give factor 8 along with the drug to replenish factor 8. And again here, the primary route of excretion for the PIs is the feces. So you see that with those agents. Alright, so those are things that are common to them. And now we have to take the representative and look at the pharmacology of your PIs. So we'll take Prevnar that is resulting from forciprevir administration. Okay. So the mechanism of action will be just inhibition of that protease. If you look at your HIV, the virus let's say that's the virus there. On the inside, it has a bullet-shaped nucleus, if you will, or nuclear capsid. And that has 2 RNA strands in it. Each RNA strand contains all the 9 genes of that virus. You divide those 9 genes into 3 major groups. You have some that are called regulatory genes. You have some that are your structural genes, and some that are called auxiliary genes. The structural Your GAG, POL, and M. Of course, the M produces the envelope for that virus. The GAG and the POL genes produce proteins that play a role in the formation of this capsid. And as we shall see later, there's something called zinc finger. So the production of that zinc finger also has to do with these genes that are structural genes. Your regulatory genes are the TAT, the REV, and the NEF. Those are the ones that control, things like your reverse transcriptase actions, and would also control the movement of the virus, the replication, and all that. And your auxiliary genes are the ones that can, for instance, control the final packaging of the virus. So you have your VPO and your VPER. So those are the 9 genes of your HIV. Okay. And these regulatory genes, particularly the NEF, like we said, can control movement. But this GAG and POL can help in the production of that protease. And remember I said when the new viral is being made, you have a lot of proteins, excess proteins. I used the pen that day, that if you have excess, this thing cannot work, so you have to remove the excess for it to work, for you to be able to write with it. And so it is the function of that protease, because the protease is supposed to remove the excess protein. If you inhibit that protease, the excess protein will not be removed, so the virus will not be viable. And your GAG-POL, those are involved in the production of your normal protease in that virus. So when you say protease inhibitor, you know precisely what you're talking about is the GAG-POL induced production of the protease that is supposed to remove the excess protein so that the virus can become viable. So that's the mechanism of action there. ADME, if the, we'll say route of administration is PO, of course. If you're talking about fosamaprinavar, and the patient is a naive patient, that is, they're getting fosamaprinavar for the first time, the dosage that you would use is 1,400 milligrams. And that will be given on the BID basis. If the liver function, or if the liver is functioning properly, okay. You know about the Child-Pugh score. Okay. If the Child-Pugh score is between 5 and 8, you have to reduce the amount that you give by 60%. If it's between 9 and 12, you have to give only 1/4 of the normal dose, 25%. So if it's 25 and 8, you give 40 to 60% of the usual dose. But if it's 9 to 12, it's only 25% of the dose that you would administer. And most people actually believe that once you get a child pill of 9 and above, don't even use a PI. Okay. So that's in the naive patient. But if the patient were an experienced patient, which means they've received the drug before, then you can use 700 milligrams POBID, usually in combination with this drug, ritonavir. Ritonavir is what you call a pharmacokinetic enhancer or a booster, if you will. And that is because ritonavir is the most potent 3A4 inhibitor among your PIs. It can inhibit 3A4 if you're administering another PI, but it can inhibit 3A4 when you're using even other drugs. For instance, what do you have in Paxlovid? Now I'm at 12 there. And it is combined with what? Exactly. See, the reason ritonavir is there is to inhibit the metabolism of number 12 there, so you can get the effects from number 10 there. Okay. Because, and that's why you call it a booster. It inhibits 3 or 4 drastically to enhance the others. So that's how you administer the drug. And when you give it orally, the fatty meal can decrease the absorption of the drug. So some cautionary statements. Number 1, don't administer it with a fatty food because you get a decrease in absorption. Number 2, don't administer it concurrently with vitamin E because the formulation, the drug already has 30 international units of vitamin E in it. Number 3, don't give it to hemophiliacs because of the hemorrhage that we talked about earlier. Number 4, beware of administering it to diabetics because of the hyperglycemia that your PIs can cause. Okay, so those are some cautionary statements when you're using Aprenavir. So in terms of its half-life, the half-life is about 7 to 10 hours. Its plasma protein binding is greater than 90%, And in this case, again, it binds to alpha acid glycoprotein, just like your Intellis, etrovirine. Okay. In terms of the metabolism, it is biotransformed mainly by your 3A4, but to some extent by your 2B6. Okay. That's the biotransformation. Then it has, like we said, an inhibitory effect on 3A4. It is a potent inhibitor of your 3A4. And in terms of the excretion, it's primarily fecal. So that's the ADN for your Saprinavir or Prinavir. Okay. You know what the indication is? Okay. And then for the adverse effects, one is fat redistribution. It can take fatty tissues and mobilize your fatty tissues from the extremities towards the trunk. Okay. And that's why I say that it produces a cushingoid adverse effect. There's a drug called Egrifta. The generic name is tesamorelin. That is a drug that you can use to manage lipodystrophy, because this fat mobilization basically results in lipodystrophy. So lipodystrophy induced by your PIs can be treated with tesamorelin, and the brand name is Egrifta. And two, it can produce anemia, and this is usually a hemolytic anemia type thing. It can produce hemolytic anemia. Remember, we said it can cause hemorrhage, so that can lead to anemia. And then on the GI tract, you can have nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea, but what stands out is xerostomia. It can cause an inflammation of the pancreas, pancreatitis. Let's see with that drug. It can produce some hyperglycemia, and it can increase your cholesterol, your total cholesterol, by about 10 to 20%. So you can get a 10 to 20% increase in cholesterol when this drug is administered. It does not affect triglycerides like the other protease inhibitors. Okay, so one has to mention that. And like your NNRTIs, very severe skin reactions. Okay. To the point of having to discontinue the drug because of those skin reactions. Because not only can you get your regular rash and hives or urticaria, it can also produce toxic epidermal necrolysis. And that's the worst skin reaction you can get from the drug. Toxic epidermal necrolysis. Okay. TENS. And of course, it can produce Stevens-Johnson syndrome. Okay. Some drugs that can interact with your amprenavir would again be drugs that would affect that 3A4, which biotransforms the drug. Amprenavir can inhibit 3A4 itself, but not as much as your ritonavir. But it causes more 3A4 inhibition than your saquinavir, for instance. Okay, so it's greater than saquinavir, but it's less than ritonavir. Just make some notations here with some of these other drugs. Your saquinavir, you can see in two formulations. There's the soft gel and then there's the hard gel of the drug. And it seems like your soft gel is somewhat less potent than the hard gel. Okay. And like we said, it can be an inhibitor of 3A4. Okay. So if you look at this, for instance, your saquinavir, because it inhibits 3A4, can actually affect the biotransformation of your NLRTILS, like the sustain that we discussed. Okay, ritonavir, you can see it in the oral solution form. The oral solution form should be refrigerated, and it doesn't taste too good, if you will. So you have to give it with, say, a chocolate drink or any sweet thing that can make the taste acceptable. And a standard adverse effect of ritonavir is that circumoral paresthesia, that is numbness around the mouth. The same thing that we mentioned when we were talking about polymyxin B. Okay, so circumoral paresthesia around the mouth, and like we said, is the most potent 3A4 inhibitor. Inavir, we can cross out, already removed from the market. Mozinavir did not really make it to the US market in good times. So we can cross that out. Tipremavir, this is one of the agents that you have to always give with ritonavir for it to work very well. And the same thing goes with lopinavir. Okay, you have to always administer them with ritonavir. If you see on that sheet where we have Lori, we're referring to lopinavir and ritonavir. Lopinavir and ritonavir. That is your Caletra. And Caletra was one of the drugs that they repurposed for the management of COVID-19, at the beginning of the pandemic. Your Caletra, lopinavir, and ritonavir. Atazanavir was the very first PI to be available for QD administration. You give 400 milligrams PO QD. The drug did not affect triglycerides. The drug did not affect cholesterol. So people thought that, okay, this is probably the best PI, until it was discovered that it can actually cause kidney stones, nephrolithiasis, and it can also cause bladder stone, that's gallbladder stone. Okay, kidney stone and gallbladder stones. And so to give atazanavir, you have to hydrate. You have to hydrate the patient a lot to prevent the formation of those stones. And then the other thing that was noticed was that hyperbilirubinemia, which can lead to that icterus and then jaundice. So that became a problem for that drug, but it's still available, of course, in combination with other agents. Darunavir, Prasista, that drug also should be administered concurrently with ritonavir. That's when it works best. And you can see darunavir also combined with cobicistat. If you look at the combination drugs that we set out, you can use darunavir concurrent and give it together with cobicistat. You can see it as prescoxib. Okay. And if you combine prescoxib with M10, then you get Simtuza. Okay. As you'll see in that handout. So darunavir is very, very effective and is being used today. Darunavir amprinavir and tipranavir, those PIs are also chemically sulfonamides. And so that will give you an idea of what their adverse effects will be. Remember, whenever you have a sulfonamide, it will be those 3 H's and R's. Hepatotoxicity, hypersensitivity, and hematologic adverse effects. And then you have the urinary adverse effect, that is crystals, so they must be administered with plenty of water. And then, of course, we have the dermatologic adverse effect. So once you say it's a sulfonamide, you can immediately guess what those adverse effects will be. And for your PIs, in terms of frequency of administration, you can do it by elimination. There are some that can be administered on a TID basis. Okay. That would be your saquinavir, indinavir, and nelfinavir. Okay, so saquinavir, the indinavir, that's already gone, and then your nelfinavir. Those are administered on a TID basis. Okay. And then, of course, atazanavir is administered on a QD basis. All the rest can be given on a BID basis. So that's how we break down the frequency of administration. Okay, and I know we mentioned some that must always be given with ritonavir. You know, like your darunavir, for instance, like lopinavir, you know, has to be given with ritonavir. Fosamaprinavirr will also have to be given with ritonavir usually. So, prinavirr. So, those are some facts to highlight with these agents. So in 5 minutes, we can quickly go over your instis, and then you can call it a day. Yeah. The instis will be integrous. Integrous strand inhibitors called this. These are the agents that will inhibit the enzyme integrase. So, examples of drugs that belong to this class will be your raltegravir. So they would all end in gravir. Okay. So you have raltegravir, and you have elvitegravir. Okay, as in Elvis, and that is usually given with cobicistat. Cobicistat is just like your ritonavir. It's another pharmacokinetic enhancer, a booster. Okay, that's your cobicistat. Causes a lot of renal problems, you know, and skin problems and jaundice. Those are the main adverse effects of that cobicistat. Nephrotoxicity, then skin issues like rash and so on. And so it can produce that, and then jaundice. Okay, and then you have dolutegravir. Okay. cabotegravir. So we can even extend it to tegravir, basically, because they're all end with tegravir. Yeah, cabotegravir. We'll just quickly look at tegravir as the representative agent there. The mechanism of action will be the inhibition of integrase. When your HIV binds to the cell, the host cell membrane, and goes into the cell, and then uncoats, and you have the genome of the virus that's now in the host cell. So you have the RNA from the virus that's now in the cytoplasm. And that has to be converted to a DNA strand. And so you have a cDNA being formed, that is complementary DNA, formed to that viral RNA. And that process is carried out by the viral reverse transcriptase. So you get the transcription of an RNA to that complementary DNA. Okay. And then this is the nucleus over here. So the DNA that is formed now will be a helical or double helix DNA, which can then go into the nucleus of the host cell. The movement of that DNA that was formed from the original viral RNA is carried out by this enzyme, integrase. So it brings in the DNA that is formed now and it embeds that DNA into the host cell nucleus. So every time your normal cell divides, it actually produces the virus. And that's why HIV/AIDS is difficult to eradicate because of that integration. And so these drugs here can inhibit that integration. So during transcription, normally this is what happens. This is the enzyme we use. DNA-dependent RNA polymerase. For the HIV, what you use for the transcription is RNA-dependent. Let's the reverse RNA-dependent DNA polymerase. Okay. And that's why you say it's reverse. That's why you call it reverse transcriptase. You know, normally you will go from DNA, the DNA unwinds, and then you get your mRNA being produced. So DNA-dependent RNA polymerase. But for the HIV, it is RNA-dependent DNA polymerase. You're going from the RNA of the virus to that complementary DNA. And that's essentially why you say reverse transcriptase. So that's how all these drugs work. They will inhibit that enzyme so that the newly formed double helix DNA does not get incorporated into the host genome. That is the genome inside the nucleus of the host cell. I'll take raltegravir was the first one made, and that's why we're going to take it as the representative agent. We know how it works, so mechanism of action, we just see that, inhibition of the integrase. And in terms of its admin, we know that the drug is administered orally. You have your regular capsules, and then you have some chewable tablets, and you have some oral solution of that drug. The half-life is about 9 hours, and its plasma protein binding is about 85%. In terms of its metabolism, it is metabolized by your UGT 1A1. U there stands for uridine diphosphate, and G is glucuronide. So we'll say glucuronal cell transferase. That's the same enzyme group that metabolizes your baloxavir. Remember we discussed that. If you look in your notes, it will be right below your neuraminidase inhibitors. Okay. Baloxavir is also metabolized by that group. Rifampin will stimulate that enzyme. So if you give rifampin concurrently with raltegravir, you will see a decrease in the plasma levels of your active raltegravir. So rifampin stimulates or induces your UGT1A1, and that can lead to a decrease in the effectiveness of raltegravir. On the other hand, omeprazole, your PPI, would depress the actions of that UGT1A1, and so that would lead to an increased level of your intact raltegravir. Okay, so that's the metabolism there, and the excretion can be both renal and fecal. So the indication, of course, usually HIV is usually in combination with other agents. And in terms of the adverse effects of raltegravir, the drug can cause a lot of muscular adverse effects. So one, you can get myopathy, to include your rhabdomyolysis, which means it will interact with what? Statins. Okay. And two, it causes a lot of renal toxicity. So it's another major adverse effect of that drug. It can increase your temperature, so you can get fever, and I'll just put that as pyrexia. It can cause pyrexia, it can cause insomnia, and it can also produce some headaches. It has a lot of pronounced dermatological adverse effects. You know, the rash, the urticaria, the SJS. You can get a lot of them from that drug. Jaundice can also be seen with that drug. And if you give it concurrently with, well, let's put the fifth one there, it can be hepatotoxic. If you give it concurrently with drugs like Tylenol, drugs like isoniazid, INH, Nizoral, which is an antifungal agent, ketoconazole, Nizoral, or with methotrexate, MTX. You can see an exacerbation of this skin reaction to the extent that it becomes very toxic, and one may have to discontinue the use of that drug. And if you administer it concurrently with darunavir, or ritonavir, you can see an exacerbation of this hepatotoxicity. Okay, so it interacts with many agents. We'll stop here and finish up the instance next time. And then we'll go to your hepatitis C drugs that you can use to manage Hep C, and drugs that you can use to manage the condition of today, that is your COVID-19. Questions?